Anthropologists are being faced with a major issue: globalization. Globalization is defined as the winding scale of cross-cultural interactions caused by the rapid movement of money, people, goods, images, and ideas within nations and across national boundaries. Take a look around you. See this McDonald's right here? McDonald's is everywhere, and it's not just nuggets that are taking over the globe. It's ideas too. It's economies, religions, ideals, standards, expectations, and everything else. And they're not all as innocent as McDonald's. Let's take a look at McDonald's. It is spread around the world, and though it's not pure evil, it has definitely affected the communities that it's in. The ability of these fast food outlets, such as McDonald's, show a positive correlation with the rise of obesity in these areas. And it doesn't end there. Globalization is posing a major threat to marginalized communities as power struggles come into play. As anthropologists, it is a duty to the marginalized people that we may study to advocate for them in the face of powerful institutions. In order for anthropologists to face the rapid change that globalization is bringing within both local and global cultures, anthropologists must focus on these minority cultures in order to preserve them in the face of globalization. Over the past few decades, anthropologists, along with other social scientists, have made discoveries and conducted studies across the globe to observe these effects of globalization. A study done by Bird proves that the culture of minority groups are getting smaller and lost because of cross-culture from globalization. People who once belonged to these cultures are now becoming part of a homogeneous culture, often replicating Western styles and influences.
Yes, so in the study done by Bird, MBA students were told to prepare for a meeting with Japanese managers. As the meeting went on, the students realized that the Japanese managers didn't act so much Japanese, but they acted more like they're from New York or Boston. So this study shows that the world's becoming more of a homogeneous mixture instead of the heterogeneous mixture it used to be.
Yes, in another study performed by Peggy Levitt, we see just how the pressures of globalization seem to persuade the smaller minority groups to conform to the ways of life of the majority culture, therefore putting the less dominant group at risk of dissolution. The example used in this study was Hispanics in American cultures. Among the observed, the majority of immigrants coming from Mexico and other Latin American countries seem to part ways with their old values and ways of life in exchange for a more westernized lifestyle.
So, what we can see here...
Wait, there's more. In a study focusing on acculturation with immigrants conducted in China, Filipino domestic workers, or sojourners as they're often called, are the largest number of domestic workers in Hong Kong. They're often marginalized in China due to their national identity and ethnicity. The study shows that this became a stressor and an obstacle for sojourners as well as salary, housing, and job conditions.
Wait, so you're telling me that not only are they having to lose part of their culture in order to assimilate to a homogeneous culture, but they're also becoming more stressed because of it?
Yes, there's a power structure here. It all started back in the 1800s when Western Europe effectively began to take over most of the globe. As they impeded on these foreign populations, they forced their Western and Christian ideals onto pretty much all of them. This created an initial structure of power that favored European fancies. Now, as globalization progresses, these repercussions are still being felt, and it's affected how we study things as anthropologists and as other scientists. One study conducted by Dr. C. McCarthy shows how historically minorities, especially women, have been reluctant to participate or not even allowed to participate in research studies. This means that most research, including medical research, is not inclusive of minorities. This is dangerous and possibly life-threatening, according to Dr. C. McCarthy. Her research shows that the results of many of the research studies would have been very different if the participant group would have been a bit more diverse. To avoid inaccurate research and inequality, we must actively include minorities in all of these studies. Science has left these communities and people behind. It is up to us as anthropologists to bridge this gap of representation.
Okay, so I get what you're saying, but I mean, new cultures are created all the time and new advancements are made. It's just the way the world works. I have some research for you.
As Leanne Arnett Jensen explains, children in the 21st century are constantly surrounded by social media, which means that all these cultures around them are just integrated into their day-to-day lives. Take the Inuits, for example, in Canada. But just because of the introduction of pro hockey games, The younger generations are becoming more aggressive and more competitive, where they used to be simply nomadic people a generation ago and were a little bit more peaceful. However, this isn't the only example I have. The younger generations, just because of watching Happy Days, have become a little bit more comfortable with showing PDA, a little bit more than the older generations would like them to be.
Okay, but that's just a small example of a positive globalization. Indigenous Americans have faced countless abuses in the face of European imperialism. Now their cultures are still under attack. Native American tribes, such as the Inuits, have struggled for centuries to resist the assimilation being forced on them and to maybe even preserve their languages. Efforts are being conducted by social scientists and Native American tribal leaders to preserve their languages, but even that just isn't enough. College courses in schools have some Native American students recording themselves speaking the language so that it doesn't die. And some people think that it's not important keeping the language and letting it go because it is not a language that is evolving around the world, but at the same time it is important because we should always be keeping our cultural roots.
Okay, well that's just one population in America. Look at this. Minority groups aren't being subject to dissolution, they're just being fitted into larger communities and cultures without losing their original way of life. A study done by Bianco in 2014 shows that many societies today aren't dominated by just one culture, but include multiple cultures and traditions. No culture just dominates or provokes another culture to die out. It's why the United States doesn't have a national language. So many people of different origins and cultures live in America, so not everyone speaks English in their home, nor are they required to. It isn't like those old days anymore. I think it's pretty cool, actually. There's a demand for English to be learned in the educational systems. Look in other countries. There's been an increased emphasis on teaching and learning English throughout Japan, but the learning and teaching of English doesn't threaten the Japanese language.
Okay, sharing languages, it's cool. It can be cool. But this globalization of English is also causing great issues for some places that don't have structured education systems like Japan. Some countries, like South Africa, do not have the money to fund resources like technology to the schools, unlike maybe wealthier countries. Quality access of education is hard to come by for the poor, and this causes a learning gap which leads to higher levels of illiteracy and unemployment. Let's take a step back. We're not saying that globalization is evil here. We're saying that anthropologists need to shift the way that they're handling studying minority cultures. There was an important paper written that really helped to define this shifting perspective. A. Gupta and J. Ferguson said in an unpublished manuscript that a view of the world as a mosaic of separate cultures is what made it possible to bound the ethnographic object, as well as to see generalization from a multiplicity of separate cases. They go on further to say that this boundedness works as more of a narrative device than as an objectively present empirical truth. What these researchers are saying is that anthropologists have been viewing cultures as something bound, often to an area or a region. However, this view can only be used as a way to tell a story and should not be taken as the way that culture and identity actually works. As globalization occurs, the regional bounds of cultures are melding with others, and therefore the old anthropological view of culture seems at risk. So long as anthropologists view culture as something so easily breakable, then culture is going to seemingly diminish. The culture of marginalized groups will be seen as smaller and therefore unequal to be on the same dialogue as more developed, industrialized, and, dare I say it, Western groups. This is where the importance of including minority and marginalized culture in the discussion is key. Old views of culture as something regionally bound grew out of German Romantic ideas, which designed specific characteristics of people rooted in national territories. Yet, as of 2015, 244 million people live outside of their birth countries. This doesn't mean that their culture is just up and disappearing. Still, their culture survives alongside them within their identity. Amidst a globalizing world, it is the concept of identity that has come to retain culture, not location. This is the aspect of culture which anthropologists need to focus on the relative culture held as somebody's bodily estate. Your body is your home and all that.